Welcome to the Do That Music Thing podcast, hosted by Christopher Foust and presented by 1840 Music Group. This is the podcast where we dive deep with the people pushing the music industry forward, whether it's managers making bold moves, promoters breaking new ground, lawyers changing the game, or artists blazing their own trail. We talk to the folks making it happen. Every episode is packed with real-world stories, strategies, and tactics you can use to grow your own career in music. If you're looking to break through or just stay sharp, you're in the right place. Let's get into it and do that music thing. I have a wonderful guest today, Mr. Randy Ojeda with Randy Ojeda Law. How's it going, Randy?
Going great, Chris. Just, living the dream, making the magic happen every day.
Every single day.
Every single day. That's that. You got to stay consistent,
I love it. Well, thanks for being on the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be a part of it.
And I would like to say that we met through the power of social media. Artists out there, get on social, network, stay consistent. It's a great platform.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the power of social media. I have so many connections that I've made just through posting online and commenting on things and finding like-minded people. Not your community might not always be in the same place as you, so it's great to be able to connect elsewhere.
Awesome. Well, Randy, let's kick things off and let's talk about what you do, and then kind of segue into your story, how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, so I am a full-time music attorney, an entertainment lawyer, but mostly for music. So I represent independent artists, producers, musicians, bands, management companies, labels, like you name it. I represent them mostly in the indie sector. Um, how did I get started? My story. So I actually started in law school. Let me take it back, actually. So before law school, I played in bands growing up. I started a band when I was 12, I think was my first band. The name would get us canceled, like in today's day and age, but it was a play on something from a Kevin Smith cartoon. So
I love it already.
yeah, I'll tell you after off the air, because it would just not fly in today's day and age. But we were 12 years old. What did we know? So I started a band, kept playing in bands all through high school and college, and then went to law school and figured that was it for me with music. Like I was just gonna hang up my bass. I'm a bass player, so I was just gonna hang up the bass guitar and just call it a day. And then while I was in law school, I met a rapper named IDK, and he needed management. And I didn't really know much about management, but the skills seemed to align with the skills that I had, as a budding lawyer. So I started managing this artist. We worked together for a while. I got him. I think when we stopped working together, he was at like 2 or 3 million monthly listeners on Spotify. So like did pretty well. And I started managing more artists, more producers, bands, and then turned that into a full-fledged management company. So, that was what I did when I graduated law school. Instead of going the traditional lawyer route, I just kept managing. I was loving what I was doing, and, it was a great experience. So I did that. Eventually, in addition to the management, got hired at a company called Symphonic Distribution, did A&R and business development for them, signed tons of labels, tons of artists to their distribution platform. And while I was working with them was when I really started to see how few artists had legal representation and how people were signing deals that they just didn't understand, and it made me realize that there's definitely, a market here for the middle class of musicians, the independent, smaller musicians, middle class, whatever you want to call it. But these musicians who, a lot of them, also have day jobs, but they're starting to make, a career out of music. They're starting to build what they're doing. They're making a little bit of money, and they need legal representation, but they're not Taylor Swift. They're not Drake. They don't have massive budgets. So I just saw how few attorneys were out there and how so many of them focused on just those big names. And I get that, but somebody needed to represent the middle, the smaller guys, So um, the pandemic happened, and suddenly my schedule went from being very, very busy to, like most people's, very, very not busy. So it was during the pandemic that I actually pivoted, shifted gears, started studying for the bar exam, took the bar exam in Florida, um, and then started this law firm basically right in the midst of the pandemic. And I've been doing it ever since, just haven't looked back. Yeah.
That's so cool though that you started off. I mean, clearly you were in law school, but
Yeah.
being a manager, man, that is a grind.
It
Like
is. It is. It's one of the hardest and thankless jobs in the music industry. It's tough because you really have to understand every aspect of the industry. Like it's not just, you're not just doing publicity, or you're not just doing booking. Like you're doing a little bit of everything all day, every day. You're in the trenches with the artist, you're doing creative work, you're doing administrative work, you're networking, it really is a grind. So yeah, I definitely respect that.
how did your background in law from school, how did it prepare you, or how do you think it made your management work better?
Yeah, it definitely, I realized I was doing a lot of what I do now as a lawyer, I was kind of sort of doing as a manager, like pseudo, not the actual, legal work, because I wasn't, you know, a lawyer yet, but it was, the just kind of the negotiations and the behind the scenes, like boardroom stuff, where you're, negotiating points on a record, or negotiating an advance, or just kind of bringing parties together. I think that's a big thing that lawyers do in the music industry, is connect people, and you also do that as a manager. Is you help build the team, you help put people around this artist or this band or whoever you're working with to lead to their success. And I notice that I do a lot of that still as an attorney.
The one image I have of a manager is, yeah, I'm sure the millennials and boomers out there will get this, but is Spinal Tap.
I was hoping you would say that.
Walk around with a cricket bat. You're like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like and that manager in Spinal Tap was also a tour manager too, right? So he was on tour with the band, and that's a whole nother can of worms and a whole nother set of responsibilities. And you really need somebody that's willing to smack people with the cricket bat to get things done.
and I think he was based off of a real character, like a real human being. Was it Led Zeppelin's manager? I think.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but I'm sure he was based on somebody. I mean, you know, Spinal Tap is more authentic than people realize, as just in general as a movie.
Totally
So
ready for that sequel coming out soon, I'm sure.
yes, I'm excited for it, and they're bringing it back in theaters for the 45th or the 41st anniversary, not the 40th, the 41st, which I think is hilarious. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Okay. Let's talk about artists, the relationship between artists and lawyers. You know, you said you work with a lot of that middle tier, right? That doesn't
Yeah.
get typically a lot of representation. When is the best time for a budding artist to reach out to a lawyer? When is like the primo time for them to, make this relationship?
I mean, right now, immediately. So, yeah, obviously I'm biased, but um, I think as early on in your career as you can. I truly think, and Donald Passman in All You Need to Know About the Music Business says the same thing. Obviously, he's a lawyer too, so also a little biased, but he says that the lawyer should be the first person on your team, and I totally believe that, because you have no idea how many artists I've seen who signed bad management deals, or signed on with a manager that wasn't looking out for their best interests, or signed a record deal that they shouldn't have signed, signed away rights that they didn't have to give up. And if they had had a lawyer in their corner, a lot of those mistakes could have been avoided, and things could have shaped up better for them. And then by the time you've already signed those deals, and then you come to me and you need help getting out of it, it's a lot more difficult for me to do my job. Whereas if you come to me before you sign the deals, we can make something happen. So I know it can be intimidating, with lawyers. People always assume, you know, the worst with attorneys, but I would try to reach out to somebody, at least have a conversation with a lawyer, and know who you're going to go to in a situation where somebody hands you a contract. But yeah, so as early as you possibly can get a lawyer, get one, have somebody in mind, at least somebody that you can call when that contract does come in. But definitely anytime you're working with somebody else in the industry, you need a lawyer. So whether that be a collaborator or a featured artist, even a session musician, you should have work for hire agreements for your session musicians. Um, anybody that you're collaborating with in any way, whether that be on the business side or the creative side, you should have some kind of agreement between each other, just to make sure expectations and everything align. So get a lawyer right now. That's my answer.
And there's really no time limit on when this stuff can hit you. I mean, I think all of us who are in the industry, I mean, we've all heard these stories. I mean, I remember as a kid watching Chris Robinson from the Black Crows showing up with a different Armani suit in court every day to prove a point
Yeah.
over a management contract that was written. Maybe it wasn't a contract, maybe it was like a song split or something over something that was written on a cocktail napkin.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
happens to the
No, it
biggest.
definitely happens. And if that's the best evidence you have, sometimes that's what you gotta work with, you know? So yeah, I mean, these things can pop up at any time, and it you just never know. If you're making music, obviously you got to make it for yourself and because you enjoy it. But the goal for everybody, I think, is for people to hear the music, right? So if you want the music to go as wide as possible, you need the proper protections and the proper contracts in place, because you just never know what's going to hit. Like sometimes the most unlikely song is the one that hits on streaming or on TikTok, or you get into an Apple commercial or something. You just never know. So it's like, figure these things out before that happens, in case that happens, because sometimes once it happens, it's too late and you can miss your shot.
Now, where do you sit on lawyers providing pitching services? Now, I know this is could be a controversial conversation, but a lot of artists, especially in the indie realm, when they think of getting a lawyer, they almost immediately think of, oh, well, this person has relationships at labels. They can pitch me and they can pitch me safely. Well, how do you sit on that discussion?
I'd sit on I'm kind of on both sides, right? So I definitely do pitch artists for opportunities, for label opportunities, management, but it needs to be a situation that makes sense. So I'm not going to put my reputation on the line for an artist that, I don't really know or don't really know about. So, I try to build that relationship first. So like, let's work on a couple projects. Let's do some contracts together. You know, let's build and get to know each other, as and how we run our businesses. And then if something aligns and it makes sense, I'm happy to jump in and pitch, and make those connections. But I don't do it for everybody. I'm not just gonna like pitch your stuff because you have money and you can pay me or whatever. Like, I don't care about that. I care about my reputation and my relationships in the industry. I mean, that's the most important thing you have in the music industry, are your relationships. So if basically I want people to know that if I'm sending them something, it's because I legitimately think this is great. This fits for the person I'm sending it to, and it makes sense to make the connection. But I'm not just going to send stuff out all day just cuz.
Makes sense. I totally get it. When it comes to artists trying to, come as correct as possible, a lot of people, a lot of artists now, me being one of them in this camp, uh, are creating our own labels, creating our own LLCs, creating our own, business infrastructure.
Yeah.
A, how important do you think that step is? And B, how would an attorney help with that sort of thing?
Super important step. Super important. So, um, whenever you're doing business in general, like this isn't just music industry, but this is just general business law, is you should have some kind of business structure or entity. Usually that's an LLC because they're flexible and easy to form. So you should have something because it limits your liability, right? So if you if you get sued for whatever reason, rather than you being personally liable for that lawsuit, the business is liable. And if worse comes to worse and you have to bankrupt the business, you're not, again, you're not touching your personal assets. It's the business, right? So that's the main reason why people form these LLCs, but also, there's a lot of tax implications with it too. So once you have an actual business, you can start writing off your expenses. So, all those guitars you have behind you, Chris, that's an expense. I mean, you need that to continue to make music. It's part of your business, it's part of your practice. You know, you gotta you gotta expense it, and that can really help come tax time rather than everything being personally tied up with your own finances. So it's very important to form an LLC, as soon as you're starting to make a little bit of money and pursue this professionally. And you need the LLC if you are going to form your own label. You need to have an LLC for the label. If you want a publishing company, you can have the publishing company be under the LLC. It's like it really provides you with that structure that allows you to navigate in business without worrying about, oh, what's the worst case scenario, you know?
So, what are some other scenarios that you would help artists with? Maybe like distribution deals,
Yeah.
sync deals. Let's talk about some scenarios, some real life scenarios. Like, what are ways that you would help artists in other ways?
Yeah, I mean, all of that. So yeah, just distribution deals, label deals. If you're signing a management contract or signing with a publisher, obviously I look over those agreements, but I also do, like you mentioned, sync licensing agreements. So making sure that you're going to be able to um, collect royalties off of your sync, and making sure that the usage is what you agree to. So I do that for sync agreements as well. I do custom agreements, so if somebody needs me to draft something specifically for them, I can do that. And a big part of what I do, obviously, is the negotiation and helping get things across the finish line. So you may be at a point where somebody's offered you something and you don't really know, like, is this fair? Is this quote unquote standard? Is this, does this deal make sense for me? That's when I recommend people come to me, and then I can, kind of guide you through that process. And, if I need to reach out to the other person's lawyer and we go back and forth, we figure something out, that's a big part of what I do. But basically, anything that involves business and music is something I can touch, and something I can, you know, help, like I said, help get across the finish line and help people, figure out what's going on. And even if you just need somebody to just explain a contract to you, you don't really need help negotiating it. You have a good relationship with the person on the other side, whatever. Like, but you just want to make sure you understand all of the fine print, all the details. I see these contracts all day, every day. So, rather than asking, your friend who does traffic accidents and personal injury and divorces about your music contract, come to somebody who does this day in and day out, and I think you'll get better support.
When I was coming up in the industry, we just started hearing inklings of the 360 deal.
Mm.
And I know that in my circle and online, a lot of people are still really concerned with the 360 deal. Are you still seeing that pretty commonplace? Do you recommend doing it? What are some, you know, tips or, navigating if you're pitched a 360 deal?
Yeah, these days, I don't see 360 deals as often. Um,
That's good news. Great.
yeah, it is. It is. I think it's less common than it was maybe 10 years ago or so. Definitely still see it, especially for the biggest artists, right? So, typically if a company's going to invest in you that kind of money, they want to be able to recoup from all sources, right? So that's kind of, so to break it down in case people are listening and don't know, a 360 deal is basically a deal where your label typically would get royalties and commissions off of not only your music and your music sales and streams, but they would get it from merchandise, they would get it from your songwriting and your publishing, and basically any source that a musician could make money, they're going to take a little bit from that pot. And really, that only happens in a situation where a label is like really putting in money and really putting in serious resources behind you. And, sometimes it can make sense to do it because you're elevating yourself to a much higher degree if you're working with a major or somebody that's going to invest in you. Doesn't always make sense, even for the biggest artists. Sometimes you can negotiate something a little better. But depending on the situation, could make sense, could not make sense. But typically at the independent level, for smaller labels, the mid-tier artists, you don't really see a lot of 360 deals anymore, just because I think artists have kind of gotten a little more sophisticated in that, and they know to look out for a 360 deal. But yeah, and I also think just on the other side, the labels have realized that that's not the way to court an artist anymore. So
Awesome. I
yeah,
think this just popped into my head, and I'd love to get your input on it. I know that, I'm a huge advocate for artist development. I think
yeah,
some of the biggest stars and the biggest, names all had incredible artist development, like your Michael Jacksons, Aretha Franklin's, Queen. I mean,
yeah,
Queen had 4 records out before they, exploded type of deal in at least in the States. So
yeah,
there was some investment there. And what seems to be happening is these indie labels are signing artists, and they're kind of essentially doing sort of artist development, and then the labels are coming in, the like the big labels are coming in and buying the smaller indies,
yeah.
letting them do the quote unquote artist development. So I would love to get your take kind of like on that entire situation.
Yeah, I mean that's the industry right now. Is you really need to, the major labels don't do artist development anymore. Like they just don't. They want to see that you've already kind of put in that work and you've already gotten to a point where, you're not necessarily fully developed, if you will, because you're always trying to grow and get bigger and hone your craft. But they want to see that you have an audience. Like that's what labels are searching for now. They're not searching for songs or musicians or bands. Like they're looking for audience. So if you can build your own audience on your own or with a small independent label, you're going to be much more attractive to a label than somebody who just has really great tunes. And that's unfortunate because obviously it should be about the music, but it's just not anymore, you know. Um, and that development is super key. So a good example I use is somebody I've known for a very long time, the artist Dochi. She just won a Grammy for best rap album, but rewind a couple years, she was releasing independently, and then she built an audience through her own YouTube videos, through her channels, through her socials, and then got the attention of TDE, Top Dog Entertainment, who signed her on as a management client, started developing her even further. Then she signed to Capitol Records, who Capitol Records. So from there, she just kept going upwards, and now she's a Grammy Award winning artist. But for years, she was playing shows at small, 100 cap rooms, 200 cap rooms, building her stage presence, building her craft. She was releasing music on her own regularly, but putting in all the effort that a major artist would. Like she was really, her videos were top notch, her songs were well produced, everything was, you know, as high quality as she could make it. And, you know, obviously she's a once in a lifetime type of artist, but that's a good example of like, she wasn't an industry plant, right? You hear that term industry plant all the time. She wasn't somebody who they just all of a sudden the next day she's on massive stages and playing festivals. Like she really worked her way up in a pretty short amount of time, but still she put in the work and she did it, and developed herself into the artist that she is now, you know.
Now, do you think with a scenario like that, do you think that long term, maybe the major labels or like the industry at large is kind of maybe inadvertently phasing themselves out? And I'm generalizing here clearly,
Yeah.
but like I think of a conversation I had really early on in my career with a potential manager, and we had just released our first album, and we were touring like 75 seat, nasty
Yeah.
little nasty.
Yeah.
Actually played a little venue in Tampa. I can't remember. It was a sushi restaurant that was also a club.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
neither here nor there. But we had just released our first record, and he really liked the music. And he said something to me that kind of stuck with me. And he said, "Well, to be perfectly honest, until you're removing 40,000 units, I don't really have a conversation. I'm not going to have a conversation with you that's of any importance."
Yeah.
And in my mind, I remember kind of like clapping back. I'm like, dude, if I could move 40,000 units, I probably wouldn't have this conversation with you.
Right.
Now, I was very young and very, naive and overtly aggressive, but do you think that maybe the this democratization of music, easy access to recording, we can release our own music. Now we're developing ourselves. We're
Yeah.
developing our own niches and our own audiences. Do you think that that is going to potentially, kind of tip the scale at some point?
I think that's already happening throughout the industry, and I think the labels are pretty scared about it. I think they're, you know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you look at the statistics right now within the industry, independent music is getting a increasingly larger piece of the pie every single year. Like independent is just cutting into it, and you see so many artists who, struggle in a label deal. They get put on the shelf, they whatever, and then they get out of their major label deals, start releasing independently, and they gain more traction without a label. So yeah, it's changing. Things are different now, and you can absolutely have a great career without a label. Potentially you can make more money without a label than you can with a label. If like you said, if you're able to move 40,000 units on your own, what do you need a label for? You know, um, unless you really need like an influx of cash. So like that's really the big, like if you need a ton of money up front, then maybe a label deal makes sense. But um, you know, labels can do basically two things for you, the two M's, right? Money and marketing. So they can give you money and they can pour fire on your marketing efforts. So, at some point you get to a point where it makes sense to sign to a major. It makes sense to sign a big deal and keep growing. But for most artists out there nowadays, I was trying to give a percentage to it, but I don't know what percentage of artists this would be. But a large percentage of artists can do fine just on their own, and that's part of just having the education, the background in whatever your background's in, and really understanding the industry and how it works. But I work with artists all the time who are paying their rent checks with their Spotify income. And you hear all the time about how Spotify pays too little, and I agree, it definitely pays too little, and I wish it paid more. But people are making it work, and they're making a living through streaming. They're making a living through live shows. They're making a living through streaming, through Twitch streaming, or YouTube Live, or whatever it is. Like people are doing this and making it happen. And like you said, it's the democratization of music. Like it's the means of production are in the hands of the the proletariat, or whatever whatever it is. It's like we can fight the good fight now, and you don't need these gatekeepers to decide whether you're doing what you're doing. And now it's flipped. It's like before, the labels would discover artists, and they would break an artist on their own, and they would introduce the audience to this artist. But now it's like the opposite. Now the labels are late to the game. They're coming at the end, once they not the end, but they're coming at some point where this artist is already buzzing. They're already doing stuff. They have an audience. They have a captive fan base, but they need money or they need marketing. And then that's when the labels come in.
You did hit on something though, and I think it's one of the biggest defining factors between artists that make a living and or blow up and ones who don't, and it's almost exclusively about effort and consistency, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, would you say that that's a pretty like dominant factor in success is just essentially kind of showing up every day?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a big factor. It's not the only factor. So just because you show up every day, it doesn't mean things are going to necessarily work out for you. But, you know, effort always beats luck, you know. So rather than sitting around and hoping that things are going to happen, if you really try to move the needle every day and you try to, you know, make these connections, network, meet other people in the industry, um, and if you stay consistent, like you said. So, you know, the release model has changed. So it used to be you would release an album, you would tour off that album, you would support the album for a couple years, and then you'd release another album. And that was basically just how the music cadence worked. But now we're seeing artists that are releasing music every week, every month, you know, twice a month, three times a month, whatever the cadence or the schedule is. Like, it's not about holding on to an album anymore. It's about putting out consistent content. And I hate using the word content in the space of music, but it is what it is. Like, you're not just competing with other music anymore. You're competing with every single app on somebody's phone. You know, you're competing with social media, you're competing with YouTube, you're competing with, you know, Hulu and Netflix and everything that they could be doing instead of listening to music. So the only way, not the only way, but one of the ways to break through that, you know, content is to be consistent and to continually, you know, keep going for hits, you know, like, and I don't mean hits like a you know, radio hit. I just mean like hits, you know, like, okay, every time you release something that you're hitting your audience with more content. So the more you can hit your audience, you know, eventually you're going to knock them out, you know.
You know, and I had a really good conversation with Mr. DeCristo over at Art Over Algorithm,
Mm.
and he's really into content. And he, everybody kind of says the same thing about, you know, nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of artists, musicians just don't like doing content. And the trick is you just got to make the capture easy, right?
Yeah.
And what's really helped me has been like, okay, well, what are the things that I like? What are the things about me personally outside of the music that I can connect with, right? Like a kind of a music nerd.
Hmm.
So I love the discussions around like, you know, one of the most highly engaged pieces I've had so far on TikTok is Metallica's Saint Anger, the music equivalent of Alien 3. Like are people starting to come back around, you know?
Dude, I could talk about this subject specifically like all day. Um, that's good. And I think you're right. I think it is. I think it is Alien 3. You know, I think people actually, you know, Load and Reload, I think are Alien 3 if we're really going to do the Metallica discussion. Um, because I think people still do not like Saint Anger, and for good reasons, but Load and Reload, you know, I think people are realizing that those two records are better than they were when they came out. Obviously, you know, people were expecting another Black album or you know, going back to thrash or whatever, but um, Load and Reload have moments, you know. Sorry, I
No,
this is
no, 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 no.
I don't mean to go on this tangent about Metallica, but
But
um,
this is the perfect example. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is a
yeah,
really good case study almost because I love Metallica and I love their entire catalog. And
yeah,
I judge me in the comments, people. I love Saint Anger. And
yeah,
I talked about this on TikTok and I released it on Google or YouTube Shorts and Instagram. And but it was super easy because I just took like 15 seconds and said that statement, like, "Hey, is Saint Anger the equivalent of Alien 3? People are
yeah,
coming around?" Question mark. And because that's something that I really love. I love the Alien franchise and I love Metallica. And that wasn't a hard thing to do because I got out of my head. And like,
yeah,
um, we should talk more about Metallica and Alien. But you
yes,
know, the get outside of your head and don't think so hard about it. Like, and just talk about the things that you like. And you know, authenticity is like the new currency, right? When it
yeah,
comes to social engagement, which means be yourself or maybe be like a slightly exaggerated version of yourself, but still be yourself. And that's like the easiest way in the world to get out there and do that content.
Yeah, and that's what people are looking for, right? So people are, why are people engaging in content? Like, because they share similar interests or they share similar thoughts than the person that they're, interacting with online. Like, if I had come across your Metallica discussion, I would have been right there because, me and my buddy Mark, like we have deep debates about the Metallica catalog all day, all the time, because it's something that we grew up with and we love, and seeing other people talk about that stuff is, we can relate to it, and that's what everybody's looking for nowadays, when in a world that's so driven by the algorithm and by, impersonal connections, to be able to make a personal connection even just because somebody likes the same thing as you. That's huge, you know.
Well, Randy, thank you so much. This is my favorite part of the show. And on the Do That Music Thing podcast, we want to provide not just the feel good stuff, like that's important, but we want to provide tactical strategies so people can move their career forward. And I love asking this question to all of our guests, and that is, what are three tactical items or tips that you would give someone, whether an artist or they want to be a music attorney? What are three things that you would give them uh, to move their career forward today?
Great question. Great question. um I would say in general, if you're trying to, thing one, if you're trying to work in the music industry, whether that be as a lawyer or a manager or whoever, or even as an artist too, um, just start going to shows. I know it sounds simple, but go to shows. Go to as many shows as you can and start asking people questions. Make friends with the road crew, make friends with the sound guy, make friends with, you know, front of house, make friends with the bartenders, whoever it is, just start making connections with people in your local scene. So go to shows, go to small shows. Don't just go to the big arena shows, but find your local venue that's probably just struggling to stay open, and go and frequent them and make as many connections as you can with your local scene, because you just never know. Like, people that I met in my local scene when I was, a teenager are now, doing things all across the industry, all over the world. And, those relationships that I built as a teenager are still relevant to me today. So that's thing one, go to shows. Thing two, um, this sounds pretty obvious. I would hope it sounds pretty obvious to people, but you'd be surprised at how often I see um, people not do this. But number two is register your music with a performing rights organization. ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. If you're in Canada, SOCAN, like whatever performing rights organization it is, just go and register your music. Like, you are missing out on so many royalties if you're just collecting from your distributor, DistroKid, or whatever. Like, there's this whole other batch of money that's potentially waiting for you. Not to mention the credit, just being in the database, and knowing, like, okay, these are all the songs that I've written. These are all the songs that I've worked on, you know. Um, so definitely register your music with a PRO. If you don't know what that means, please reach out to me. Like, I will help you. I will get you started and get you going. Um, and the third thing, hmm, honestly, just be cool to people, like, be friendly, and I wish I had more specific tactical advice, but honestly, it's just, people want to work with people that they get along with. So, it goes back to kind of the first point too, where I said, like, the connections I made when I was a teenager are still relevant. You know, you just never know where people are going to end up, or how somebody might be able to help you down the line, or how you can help them. And, don't burn those bridges. Don't be a jerk to people. Like, just be genuine, be good, if that's what you are, unless you are a jerk, and then, let us know quickly, you know.
That is one of the most overlooked pieces of advice that will make or break a career. Are you a good hang? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No,
And
I say that to bands all the time when they're trying to get support slots on tours, is like, it's like 50% like, okay, can you bring some audience and can you bring good stage energy and get the crowd going? But the other 50% is, are you a good hang? Like, can the headlining bands sit down and play poker with you or whatever it is that you want to do? And if you're just like shut out and you're not nice to people, like nobody's gonna want to take you on tour.
And I'm going to give a little story kind of that relates to this. And I'm a member of NSAI, which is Nashville Songwriters Association International. It's a really awesome group. They have chapters all over the place. Their headquarters here in Nashville, so I get to go down to the office a lot. But the head of membership down there is Jill, and I met Jill when she was, I believe, the stage manager at the Wild Horse Saloon. So this is in my second band, and we released our record, and we wanted to get better touring slots or open for bigger bands. And we're like, well, let's start locally and let's see if we can build some relationships. And the booking agent, her name was Kara, and Jill at the Wild Horse Saloon, which is like it was a fairly larger venue in town, indoor. It's Luke Combs's place now, if anyone's curious. But we got a slot opening for Queensryche randomly.
Oh, great band.
Yeah. Dude, Jeff freaking killed it on his vocals and his saxophone.
Yeah.
But we had such a good time, and we made sure to, befriend Jill and Kara. And when we left, we sent them flowers. We sent them gifts. Like, thank you so much for taking a chance on us. And guess what? We got another opening slot the next month.
Yeah.
And fast forward, 10 years, I'm reaching out to songwriters, and I reach out to NSAI, and I have my little email like, hey, I'd love to get more involved in the organization. Would love to talk to someone in membership. And I got a reply that just said Foust ? And it was like Moody ?
Yeah.
We hit it off. Like we rekindled this friendship. And we hadn't seen each other in years, but because both of us made really good impressions on each other, we were able to, reconnect. And she was she was able to help me out a ton and get me some solid co-writes and get me back in to that Nashville songwriting scene. So it pays to be a good hang and be nice to people.
Yeah, that 100%, 100%. Again, you hear this all the time. People always say the music industry is a relationship business, and it 100% is. So you want to have good relationships. Like, you just, life's too short to be a jerk to everybody,
Somebody print that.
Yeah, put it on a t-shirt. But give me royalties for that.
Of course. Well, you'll write that in the contract, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Randy, thank you so much. Where can people learn more about you and your practice?
Yeah, so you can find me at randyojeda.law.com. On socials, I'm at real Randy Ojeda on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or X or whatever the hell it's called these days. But I'm on all the things. I'm at real Randy Ojeda on everything. So find me. I have a Discord server if you're into that. It's we have a community of about 200 or so people that are mostly like producers and musicians, people trying to learn about the industry. People ask questions on there, share resources, but it's a great time. If you're into Discord, I can definitely send you a direct link to join. Just DM me on Instagram. But yeah, just find me, Randy Ojeda, Ojeda, and I'm out there.
Awesome. Well, Randy, thanks for being on the show, sir. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast. To learn more about me, the host, Christopher Foust, you can catch me online at christopherfoust.com, on Instagram at chrisfaustmusic, or on Twitter at chrisjamesgtr. If you'd like to be a guest on the Do That Music Thing podcast, please feel free to email me at chrisfaustmusic@gmail.com. If you're a fan of the show, head on over and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Foust. Let's go do that music thing.